Hello, my name is Kate Welly, and I will be critiquing an article using the checklist for evaluating quantitative research reports from our textbook, Introduction to Research and Education. So I chose the article published in January 2025 called The Key Roles of Teammates, Coaches, and Instrumental Support in Adolescent Sports Participation, a one-year perspective study. Okay, so this title, in my opinion, is great. It's brief, it's to the point. It clearly identifies our population, which is adolescents, our dependent variable, which is sports participation, and our major independent variables, which are teammates, coaches, and instrumental support. It also tells us the style of the study, which is a perspective design. Okay, and it, does not use any ambiguous language. It's not vague. It's very clear. The authors go on to state the problem right in the introduction, and I quote, "An active lifestyle, particularly through sports, is essential for lifelong health and well-being. Despite its benefits, sports participation often declines from adolescent onwards, which highlights the need to understand and address the factors that influence sports participation in adolescence." So that's the problem that we're researching. They go on in the introduction to talk about lots of previous research, mostly surrounding motivation and perceived competence and how that impacts sports. And they provide evidence from previous studies that show that social support does have a great impact. However, the types of social support and the sources of social support have not yet been researched. So the authors are justifying the rationale for the study by saying that there's a gap in the research, and also by doing this more nuanced study, this could have a positive impact on program development for teens that can help mitigate that drop off from sports participation as they enter second and third year of secondary school. Okay, so they also acknowledge two clear hypotheses in their introduction. One, we hypothesize that social support from parents, peers, i.e. friends and teammates, and the coach will be the most strongly positively related to the hours of sports participation. And number two, in addition to this, we hypothesize the various types of social support will be positively related to hours of sports participation, with emotional and instrumental being the most influential types. And then they go on to say that they're also using this as a time to explore the shifts over time, since adolescence is such a pivotal developmental point in our lives. So who is most influential for you as you're individuating from your parents is probably going to shift, like from parents to maybe people on the same sports team or other adult mentors like your coach. So that's more of an exploratory part of the research, is seeing how these things change over time, and there's not an exactly formed hypothesis around that aspect. Okay. Participants. So the population is clearly defined as being adolescents. The researchers collected a convenient sample from 8 schools in the Netherlands with which they already had a working relationship. The researchers sent letters to the PE teachers at these schools. 5 responded and agreed to send emails to their students and parents, informed consent. Out of 1,127 kids, 530, half of which being boys, agreed to participate. Of note here is that this is a convenient sample, so we can't generalize the results of the study to the population at large. And also, it should be noted that this recruiting period was from September 2020 until October 2020, which we know was in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, their study spanned from 2020 until 2022. So this was during a period of intense fluctuation, turmoil, upheaval, social distancing. The Netherlands only experienced a pure lockdown for about a month, as far as my research goes, from 2021 to 2022, but that's also going to have an impact on this that they don't acknowledge in the study, and I think that's a major flaw in this. So, okay, that's that. At the outset of the study, the authors collected some demographic information which notably did not include socioeconomic status, which I thought was interesting because obviously a family's income and their availability of resources or access to resources is going to have an impact on whether or not their kid can continue playing sports or even play in the beginning. They also collected anthropometric data to calculate BMI, which they don't address why at any point in the study, why they're gathering the physical data on these adolescents. So that was kind of a question mark for me. Procedurally speaking, the authors clearly defined their dependent variable, which was hours of weekly sports participation, as well as their independent variables, which were identified as 7 different types of support and 7 sources of support and 6 types of support. Both of these variables were assessed using validated questionnaires, with 2 of the items in the support type being developed based on systemic review. They also built on previous research, which demonstrated motives and perceived competence as being important considerations in impacting sports participation. So they included these as covariates and assessed them using a Likert scale that was adapted from the Motives for Physical Activity Measure revised scale and other studies. In their analysis of the data, the authors used a multi-level structure with repeated measures, which in my opinion is appropriate given the number of variables being assessed and the multi-level approach. So you have 3 sets of nested data, 1 being adolescents, 2 being adolescents clustered in classes, and 3 being adolescents clustered in classes in schools. They also used regression models to demonstrate the relationship between the dependent and independent variables and illustrated their variability across scatter plots. Okay, give me 1 second here. In their results, they acknowledged the attrition rate, which was out of the 530 adolescents that had signed up, only 294 were in the final analysis sample. They found that the basic demographic information that they collected at the beginning, that boys spent more time in organized sports than girls, and that adolescents who were playing a sport their first year were more likely to continue than those who didn't. I thought the gender piece was interesting, but something to tack on to the end for future research, that if we're trying to get all teens to continue playing sports, why is there a difference between boys and girls? I don't know. They present many different models with descriptive statistics and comparative analyses showing isolated the sources of support and types of support and their impact, as well as how they work together simultaneously. And everything is very clearly illustrated, so no criticisms there. And in the discussion of the results, they found that largely this supported their hypotheses, not exactly, with they found that instrumental support was by and large the most impactful type of support on sports participation, but that multiple kinds of support were better than none. And they found the same with source of support. So they found that coaches, parents, and teammates were the most influential in sports participation, but multiple sources of support was better than one. They were surprised to find that PE teacher support had not that much influence unless it was added with everything else. And actually more of a negative relationship, more PE teacher support, they found an association with lower sports participation, which is interesting. But they clearly go over their hypotheses, and they also address the level of individual variability, which I found very interesting, that they found that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach, that there were some adolescents who had high levels of support but low levels of sports participation, and vice versa, which to me made me think of personality traits, and I'll get to that at the end. As far as exploring how these things changed over time, they found that it was pretty stable, which is interesting to note. They go on to acknowledge the limitations of the study, one being their convenient sampling and how they need a more representative more representative random sample of the population. They also talked about how they dumbed down one of the questionnaires about sources of support. Instead of making it about frequency measure, they made it more of a binary for timeliness of completion, which they believe may have missed out on some of the nuances. However, their findings did ultimately support the notion that a greater level of social support, both in type and source, leads to greater sports participation, so that further research could be done to develop better programming, with the suggestion that PE teachers could be armed with more training around like gathering resources for those kids who can't afford to play sports, and that could be more of an instrumental role for PE teachers to play, to like reach out to charities, sports clubs, and try and get donations for these kids. So in my opinion, in conclusion, the results of this study should not be used inferentially to make inferences about the wider population, given the convenient sampling, also the omission of socioeconomic status information, and without acknowledging the unprecedented time and history at which this was conducted. However, the authors did use past research and assessments to support their study, as well as sophisticated measures of analysis. So this would be interesting to reproduce with a randomized sample, with the addition of socioeconomic status, and in my opinion, adding a personality trait assessment at the beginning might explain some of the individual variability that they found and couldn't explain. Also, if there is a historical event, making sure to like take that seriously and interweave that somehow, or repeat it based on the fact that there was an unprecedented time in history during the length of the study. That is all I have to say about that. Thank you. Goodbye.